This is my fourth story. It's my fourth day in a row of creating a video, trying to put one of these out every day if possible. I'd really appreciate if you do like it, that you like, share, and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. I hope you enjoy. Today wasn't just like any other school day. It was the last day of college freshman year. 4 friends, Harold, Zachary, Jessica, and Anpu, were exiting the school's doors with the feeling that the shackles were finally off. They had all planned on getting together later that night to camp in the woods not too far from their hometown. Harold was not dealt the best set of cards. He had been diagnosed with rapidly growing leukemia, a cancer of the blood. Zachary and Jessica were dating. Imagine an obnoxious, immature couple featuring a jock and a cheerleader that had no problem with grotesque amounts of PDA, public displays of affection. They were considered the cool kids in school, so many just put up with them. And Anpu, a foreign exchange student with a somewhat heavy accent, very intelligent and performed top of his class in track and field, which explains the friendship to the couple. That night, each of the young adults went home, gathered their belongings, and set out to meet up where they had all agreed upon outside of the nature trail they had been walking for years. Once together, Harold walked up to Zach and Jess. "Hey, you guys put your tongues back in your mouth before I pass away from disgust." Harold had a great sense of humor about his inevitable demise. Zach laughed and said, "Hey man, there's enough to go around." At this, Jess blushed and told Zach to stop it. Anpu was the last to arrive, but he came from the trail. "I was so excited I figured a quick run through the trail before we met wouldn't hurt," he said, barely sweating due to his long-term track competing. The group set off towards the trail, and about midway through they decided to veer way off the trail to find a good place to camp that wouldn't be noticeable by the public. Camping was forbidden in these woods due to the vast number of people that went missing in them. They trudged through a heavily thicketed forest, Harold often growing tired, so they would stop quite often. On one of the many stops that they had, Zach said, "Let's just go already." Jess stood with him, snickering towards Harold. Anpu said, "Hey, give the man a minute. What's wrong with you two?" Harold was having a rough time, becoming exhausted quite fast. They had planned their route to go due west, so finding their way back would be easy with the compass that Zach carried. They sat there for a minute when they heard a rustling in the trees. They all went on high alert. "What the hell was that?" Zach said. They all went into defensive mode and listened closely. These woods had been littered with mountain lions, but they generally would leave a group alone. That's when they heard a growl. It started low, but then proceeded to grow higher. They all freaked out. Harold was no longer tired, but had an extreme amount of adrenaline. The noise was coming from near the trail they exited, so they all fled somewhat aimlessly in their westbound route. They heard rustling in the trees above them as they ran, but the forest was so thick, and it was so dark at this point, not only due to nightfall, but due to the canopy created from this massive cluster of trees. After a few minutes of tripping on branches and cutting themselves on the sharp underbrush they were unable to avoid due to the speed they were going, they found a clearing. It was a ditch surrounded by 10-foot hills. It would provide them with some cover and comfort. Zach stopped and said, "Hey, we should be fine. I haven't heard anything in quite some time." Jess whimpered, "We should probably just leave." Anpu quickly interrupted, "It's probably safer to leave during the day. The sun will provide us with safety." At that, the group decided to make camp. Harold was seeing dots in his vision. He had pushed hard to make it out of those thick woods. Zach said, "I'm not making the tent for you. Me and Jess need some alone time." Zach winking at Jess. Anpu shot the two a very dirty look and proceeded to help Harold set up his tent. Anpu had done this many times, so it was quick and easy for him anyways. They all had a fire. Harold was so exhausted, he went to sleep first. By the fire, the remaining 3 sat. Jess stated, "I'm tired," winking at Zach and pinching him on the thigh. At this, Anpu rolled his eyes. He put his tent as far away from theirs on purpose to avoid their nonsense. After the 2 of them went to bed, Anpu was looking up at the stars when he saw a set of yellow glowing eyes in the trees from the direction they had come from. Anpu had stared at them intently for quite a while, just frozen. He continued to stoke the fire and figured it wasn't worth waking the rest of the crew. Eventually the eyes seeped back into the forest, most likely scared off by the roaring fire. The next morning, when they all woke up, Harold and Zach didn't want to leave. "This is my last chance to enjoy the woods. We knew the risks coming in here. Aren't you a man, Zach?" Harold would say, this knowing it played off Zach's macho man routine. To this, Zach stated, "A man never runs." But Anpu could see the fear in his eyes. Jessica whined about how she didn't want to stay, but she was outnumbered 3-1. So they decided to stick it out in their clearing. They all set off on a hike. Zach had a compass in hand, Jess her phone, which was pointless because there wasn't service for miles. Anpu had a walking stick and was helping Harold traverse the unforgiving land. Harold was grateful and remained with a semi-forced smile on his face, enjoying what he could. Zach and Jess ran over to a large drop-off to a very rocky river. When Anpu and Harold caught up to them, Zach was joking with Jess, slightly nudging her towards the edge. Jess was screaming, telling him to stop messing around. Harold was struck with the beauty of the edge and seemed to have gazed into the stream while the others conversed. After some time, they returned to camp and cooked some of their MREs that they had brought with them. By this time, the sun was just starting to set. Tired from yesterday and his demise, Harold said, "Time for me to kick the bucket." Anpu gave him a hug and said, "Sleep well, my friend." Zach snickered and called Anpu queer for hugging him, to which Jess giggled. Anpu shot them both a dirty look and went off to his tent. Zach and Jess proceeded to drink and stoke the fire, not letting the two others going to bed ruin their good time. Jess eventually got a stomachache, apologized to Zach for ruining the fun, and went off to bed. Zach was aggravated, but figured he wouldn't let this ruin his good time. He sat there for about half an hour and retired to camp himself. About an hour later, in the dead of night, Zach heard rustling around the campsite. He tried to wake Jess, but she was dead asleep, and shooed him away. With her queasy stomach, she was unwilling to move. He opened the tent to see the camp surrounded. It was dark and the fire was still going. If you've ever been near a fire in the woods, it does illuminate the surrounding area, but leaves no visibility outside of that area. He could make out what looked like cat's eyes surrounding in 360 degrees on the hill that they were centered in. Yellow, red, orange eyes all peering down on him. He yelled for the others and quickly ran towards Harold's tent, but he was gone. When he got to Anpu's tent, he was sound asleep. He shook him awake, telling them what was going on, but the two peered outside of the tent, but nothing was there. Anpu stated, "Very funny. I'm going back to bed." Zach told him, "I'm not kidding. I saw them surrounding us, and Harold's missing." Anpu responded, "Oh God." The two patrolled the surrounding area, but Anpu eventually said, "We will get lost if we go searching at this hour. We will continue in the morning." Zach stated, "What if they come back?" To which Anpu replied, "Well, stoke the fire. The mountain lions won't come near it. Plus, hopefully Harold sees us and finds his way back. He probably went to the bathroom. I'm going to get some rest. After you add some wood to the fire, I recommend you do too." Zach ended up staying awake the rest of the night, drenched with fear, making the fire as big as possible. The following morning, Zach and Jess wanted to leave. Zach, sure of what he saw last night, said, "Either we leave now, or me and Jess leaves. We can't risk another night out here." At this, Anpu felt his hand was forced and went to go see if Harold was back in his tent. But Harold wasn't there. He yelled to Zach and Jess to come over and look at what he was seeing. On his bed, open to a page nearing the end of the book. It was written by Harold. Anpu read it out loud. It was dated yesterday, time-stamped when he decided to lay down. "Today was a great day. I got to see the most beautiful sights with my friends and couldn't help but to feel I was lucky to have lived as long as I did. Over the last year, I got to experience my body falling apart and many painful and unforgiving treatments. But with that came the love of my friends and seeing some truly great things in life. Zach and Jess, you both are a massive pain, but I know you both mean well and I will miss you both dearly. Anpu, you were a great friend and helped me overcome these hurdles as if they were your own. When I saw that river, I knew I wanted to be there forever. Don't be sad about my passing. I will never forget the ending you all made possible." The group of three just sat there, struck by this note, as if it had punched them in the gut. They knew what they would see at the river, but they had to see if maybe he hadn't taken the plummet yet. It was a good few miles away from camp, and a good portion of the hike was through very unforgiving land. They assumed maybe Harold would still be on his way there or had decided not to make the jump. But by the time they got there, they found his red bandana sitting under a rock with Anpu's walking stick sitting over it. They tried to see if he was at the bottom of the cliff, hopefully alive, on the rocks, but nothing was there, just a rapidly flowing river. The group cried and started heading back. Jess tried to phone the authorities, but as usual in this heavily of a forested area, way off the trail, there was no reception. The group headed back to camp to go and grab their supplies. They decided going back to civilization from the cliff wasn't smart, because they didn't know what would lie due east of them on their way back. Ultimately, due to their broken spirits and being so tired from the last 2 days in those woods, they arrived back at camp when nightfall started. Anpu explained that there was nothing they could do for Harold, and although it was their duty to report this, there was no reason dying for it. They all decided to turn in early, Anpu now sleeping in his tent next to Zach and Jess's tent. That night, however, the howls started again, but this time coming from their west. But it sounded like many, many howls synchronized, starting low-pitched but ending with a high-pitched shriek. The three jolted to attention. They heard what sounded like a very delicate but quickly moving group of whatever these creatures were, bounding quickly for their camp. In their depression last night, none of them had stoked the fire, and there was no time to rebuild. At this, the three started sprinting east into the woods, hoping they could outrun whatever this was, or at least hide in the thicket. Anpu, having been a runner, vaulted and sprinted forwards faster than Zack and Jess. If it weren't for the dire circumstances, they would have been impressed, but instead Zack yelled to him, "Come back, you coward, help us!" Jess had tripped on a root and sprained her ankle bad. Hearing the creatures howling and bounding closer to them, Zack said, "I'm sorry, babe," and just started sprinting to the east. Jess screamed for Zack to come back, but there was no response. She went for her phone, but it was gone. She knew she had it last night, but she no longer did. Zack heard her from far away. "Zack! Zack! Please, Zack!" Her speech was cut short, and Zack just kept running. Out of fear and confusion, he lost his direction and reached for his compass, but it was gone. He could have sworn it was in his pocket, but alas, it was not. At this, he didn't know what to do. He decided to backtrack to Jess and try and see if she had her phone still, knowing this was his only hope to find his way back. When he rounded the trees that he knew were the ones he left her at, his eyes widened. There he saw Anpu sitting over Jess's body. She had a hole in her chest and wasn't moving. He said, "Anpu, what happened? I saw you in front of us. Why are you here?" Anpu looked up. Zack could see the blood running down his chin. Anpu's teeth were razor sharp, his eyes blood red. Zack started backing up when two human-like creatures dropped at least 100 feet down and grabbed both of his arms, holding him back. It was as if they had claws. The more he struggled, the harder their claws dug in. At this, he stopped fighting and looked at Anpu. Anpu's veins were bulging, like a bodybuilder's does, and he looked like he threw on 20 pounds of muscle overnight. His hands open on either side of his body, with razor-sharp claws protruding from the tips of his fingers. "What the hell are you?" Zack screamed. With an evil-looking demeanor, Anpu said while staring at Jess's lifeless body, "Watch your tone and seal your mouth, young boy." Zack was equally as puzzled as he was in pain from the claws digging into his skin. "You see," said Anpu, "my name is Anubis. I was named after the god of death. My people," he gestured to the creatures behind him holding him back, "have been here for thousands of years. Well, not here but traversing the lands." Zack yelled, "What the Enough!" said Anubis. "I have heard enough from you and will tolerate nothing but silence. My people were being tortured by the great floods and desperately needed harvest back. In ancient Egypt, 1378, in the Common Era, my people were praying to the great Sphinx of Giza to stop the floods and bring harvest back. A foolish man named Muhammad Saim al-Dir had been stupid enough to try and destroy our beloved Sphinx. We sentenced him to death." Zack was trembling but unable to move, not just because of being bound, but scared of what was to come next. Anubis continued, "After this, we continued to pray to our great gods. Anubis had visited us to take Al-Dahir's heart in his hand and weigh it against a feather. The man was impure and deserved his fate. He bestowed upon us a curse to solve our problems. We no longer needed food, we needed flesh. By offering him the hearts of evil mortals, it would generate the immortality of the great Sphinx inside of us and give us her beautiful intelligence. Anubis then blessed us with immense strength and agility that he had personally held. As long as we continued his sacrifice, we would live on, never hungry again." Anpu then tore a fresh piece of flesh from Jess with his teeth effortlessly. He then crushed Jessica's arm and ripped it clear off as if it was nothing and dropped it to the ground while standing up. "You see, we target the most despicable humans. You mortals are so worthless." Zack screamed out, "You can't do this, you're crazy!" He tried to move, but the two holding him crushed his arms with ease. Zack bellowed out with great pain, "This is your last warning, silence!" Anpu gestured behind him to come. "We aren't monsters, we save those of pure thought." Harold came out of the shadows, holding an ancient scale. "Sorry, Zack," Harold would say, eyes to the ground, salivating, looking at Jess. Anpu explained, "We performed the rituals on Harold. I read his diary yesterday, and I realized that he was pure of heart, and that he deserved to be one of us." "You can't do that!" Anubis bounded towards Zack at an incredible speed, leaping right in front of him, latching onto his throat and tearing it from his body before he could finish his sentence. Zack gargled, trying to breathe, but it was no use. "I told you to be quiet." Zack's head started to bob, but the creatures behind him grabbed his head and held it up. Anpu proceeded to tear his heart straight from his chest and place it on the scale. It's said that you can stay conscious for quite some time after your heart is removed. On one side of the scale, Zack's heart. On the other, a feather glowing with a yellow light. Anpu smirked and said, "I knew it." The scales did not tip in Zack's favor. This was followed by Anpu saying, "Feast, my people. Let their blood flow upon you." The second last thing Zack saw was a stampede of these creatures bounding towards them on all fours, pulling and jumping their way through the trees. Anpu stated, "Come, mother, father, he's finished." The two creatures dropped Zach to the floor. He looked up, seeing the two people who had him over for dinner many times through the last year, walking towards Jess's lifeless body. Zach starts blacking out, his eyes staring upwards as he gave his last attempt at a failed breath. The last thing Zach would see is many of these ancient people leaping down from the trees above, tearing him limb from limb. It has been months since Anpu's family, Zach, Jessica, and Harold had gone missing. At a college hundreds of miles away, school was starting. Freshmen poured into the lunchroom, sitting down for their meals. Alan, a self-proclaimed bad boy, stood near the table of jocks, holding a young boy up by the shirt. He was teasing him and demanding he paid for his lunch. The young man, held up by the shirt, said, "I'm sorry I stepped on your shoe. It was an accident, but I have no money with me. Just the lunch that I brought from home." At this, Alan grabbed his lunch from his hand, threw him back, and told him to leave if he knew what was good for him. He sat down to grab the bag of chips out of this boy's lunch, throwing the rest out, making sure the boy saw. The table laughed and talked about their upcoming trip. In walks a freshman who was clearly in good shape, wearing a sports jacket. He sat down at the table and laughed, saying, "Happy you gave that kid what he deserved. I'm your new quarterback. Can't wait for our upcoming trip." Alan looked over and sized this man up, but he liked his demeanor. "Pleased to meet you." He punched the new guy in the shoulder. "The name's Alan." The freshman replied, "Pleasure's all my own. My name's Anpu." Another young man walked in and sat down next to Anpu. "And this is my brother Harold." I hope you enjoyed this story. I actually did some research into what happened back in 1378 in Egypt. It was when the Sphinx's nose was broken off by the man Muhammad. He did it because the people there were praying to the gods in order to try and get them to stop the floods and restart harvest. From there, I kind of, threw together what I feel would be a good story and what would come of a situation like that. The man Muhammad was put to death back then in 1378 CE. So I do hope you enjoyed this story, and I do hope you, like, subscribe, and share for the future. I'm trying to come out with these stories as quick as I can while still having a decent enough story behind it. So I appreciate your time, and I really hope you have a nice day.